folks, Ginger here, and I'm with my other kitty, Miss Maple. As you can tell, we're starting to go a little stir crazy here, staying at home with this governor's order. I hope everyone's well and you're staying safe. This presentation will cover lectures for both Thursday, March 26th and Tuesday, March 31st. Also note that quiz number 5 will be on Tuesday, March 31st. It will cover Paul Sizer's lecture, sculpture lecture, and 2 days of architecture lecture. Well, without further ado, let's get started. Architecture is an art form with great potential for enhancing lives. Every day we live, work, and move about indoor and outdoor spaces that have been designed by individuals or teams of creative architects or environmental designers that make their designs after hearing needs and concerns of clients and those who will win their designs. As you can see in this slide, a significant building that affects our daily lives and a most modern architectural concern is our classroom that's held within the Richmond Center for Visual Arts. A little more than 10 years ago, I and many other faculty members in the Frostick School of Art began working with Smith Group to design the space. Our concerns that we expressed to the architects was that it needed to be a space that talked about the people that would live inside of it. It would inspire those people to create works of art, and it would be a place that would showcase everything that we would make in that space. And I think we did a rather fine job in doing that. Architecture is frequently overlooked and misunderstood as art form. First, because of its constant presence, and second, because it's generally considered a necessity rather than an expressive statement. However, I'd argue that it's both. As the art form that often surrounds us in our daily lives, architecture has long been made for human survival. Architecture is the art and science of designing and constructing buildings for practical, aesthetic, and symbolic purposes. As an art form, architecture is concerned with the design of the space, who's using it, and how people use it. As a science, architecture is a physical problem. How does the structure hold up its own weight as loads are placed on it? Architecture must be designed to withstand the forces of compression, expansion or pulling, bending or curving, and in any of these combinations of physical forces. So the 3 key issues understanding architecture are function, how a building is used, form, how it looks, and structure, how it stands. For at least 5,000 years, people around the world have developed impressive techniques for building structures that go far beyond providing shelter. In historic times, when nomadic hunters and gatherers became farmers and village dwellers, houses evolved from caves to huts and tents and into substantial structures. In this slide, we see examples of a Mongolian yurt, an African mud hut, Native American Indian pueblos from Bandelier National Park in New Mexico, and megalithic temples from Malta, all from the earlier histories of architecture, and some that are still being used to this day. During the Middle Ages, the tallest buildings were stone churches. However, during our own age of commerce, our tallest buildings are office buildings. And we'll start by looking at varieties of stone architecture, and the vocabulary that I'd like you to key into is dry masonry, post and lintel, arches, vaults, buttresses, and domes. The evolution of architectural techniques and styles has been determined by the materials available in the surrounding environment and by the changing needs and the values of that society. Since the beginning of history, most structures have been made of wood, stone, earth, or brick. Each of these natural materials has its own strengths and weaknesses. For example, wood. It's light. It can be used for roof beams, whereas stone, which is heavy and generally good for vertical supports, can be used for load-bearing walls. The wood or stone has its weaknesses. It's not effective as a roof because it's much too heavy and can fall in on the occupants. So keep these ideas in mind when we look at all of these different architectural techniques. Much of the world's major architecture has been constructed of stone because of its permanence and its availability and its beauty. On a mountain ridge nearly 1,000 feet above sea level is the location of Machu Picchu. Machu Picchu was built in the classical Inca style with dry stone walls, and it was built by one of the Inca emperors. Its people lived there for only 80 years. They probably died from smallpox from the Spanish conquistadors. You'll note that it's isolated on a mountaintop, thought to be for spiritual reasons, because of its location and positioning in accordance to the sun. Note the terraces on the grounds around the living sites. These were thought to be used for cultivations, but bring to question available resources. Was there limited water sources? And then we might consider if water was an issue, perhaps they built there for its protective positioning. To this day, there's still a lot of questions about why these people built in this particular spot. It's one of the maybe most fascinated places in the world to travel to. It has become a great tourist destination. In the past, entire cities were built very slowly, by cutting and placing stone upon stone. Dry masonry is the simplest building technique, and it's basically two stones piled on top of one another. The Great Zimbabwe Stonehouse in East Africa has an elliptical structure built, um, and this was made in the 12th century. Um, the people who built it lived there for about 300 years. The fascinating point is that it is nearly round with several conical structures inside. Its original function is still unknown. What we see when we look at the walls of Great Zimbabwe is that they're made of dressed or cut local stone. The walls are approximately 30 feet high and they're 15 feet thick at the base, and then they taper slightly towards the top. Roofing was probably grass held together with sticks, as there were not a lot of trees in the local environment. This structure represents an ancient stone dwelling of a trading city, and it held as many as 20,000 people, and is the largest ancient stone structure in South Africa. In dry masonry, when no mortar is used, the weight of the stones themselves become the structure. The stones are often cut or shaped, and that's also called dressed. And a great example of dry masonry work is in the Great Pyramids of Egypt. Here are several other examples of dry masonry work. This technique has been used to make rudimentary structures such as markers, piles, and cairns, which are located over on the right side of the screen. They've also been used throughout the world in structures to produce columns, such as this ancient Roman structure, the Parthenon. Now, prior to the 20th century, dominant structural types that were commonly used were what's called post and beam, also called post and lintel. This basic system was later improved upon in arch and vaulting systems. We'll be looking at those in just a minute. The term lintel is preferred by art historians and is usually associated with stone. By today's standards, architects and builders usually employ this basic system with wood, steel, and reinforced concrete. These are modern materials. Most of the world's architecture, including modern steel structures, have some type of post and beam construction incorporated into their structure. Vertical posts or columns support horizontal beams and carry the weight of the entire structure. This is an example of post and beam, but also dry joints in Mycenaeans Greek. The Pantheon in Rome, Italy, is an example of the refinements of the post into columns. Now, originally, columns were carved in one piece, though as buildings became bigger, columns began to be constructed from separate drums. These were initially carved and fitted together using a wooden dowel or a metal peg in the center of the drum. Columns could then be made to piece together with varieties of drums. This was an incredible invention because these columns were remarkably resistant to seismic activity. Those wooden dowels that pieced them together were able to be flexible during seismic activity. The evolution of columns in the ancient world has been classified within architectural orders. The three principal orders are Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian. And this was developed by the Greeks and Romans as adornment. They were decorative additions to the columns. The columns became so much a part of that aesthetic look of a building that the columns themselves began to become independent artistic elements. And many of these same elements are still used today in buildings and architecture that regularly is displayed. Both Egyptian and Greek builders placed their columns close together because stone is weak under load-bearing stresses that are inherent to a beam. The structural invention that overcame this weakness was the semicircular or round arch, made from wedge-shaped stones fitted together with joints. These stones were cut, dressed in angles based on the curve. And during construction, a temporary wooden support carried the weight of these stones until that final stone was set in place at the top. That final stone is called a keystone. Now, when a keystone is placed in a continuous arch, load-bearing capacity is created. Then the wooden framework can simply be removed, and many of these ancient arches are still standing strongly to this day. Master builders of Roman cities created aqueducts, and these are examples of the functional beauty of Roman engineering. Dry masonry blocks weighing up to 2 tons each make up these large arches. Water was once carried in a conduit at the top of the first level. The other levels served as a bridge for traffic. Aqueducts built by Romans are still standing after 2,000 years and attest their excellence in design and construction. Here's a modern arch. This is the Gateway Arch by Eli Saarinen. It's a 630-foot monument in St. Louis, Missouri, and is located at the site of St. Louis's founding on the west bank of the Mississippi River. Clad in stainless steel, it is the world's tallest arch. It was built as a monument to westward expansion of the United States and is commonly referred to as the Gateway to the West. It's located in a popular tourist destination of Gateway Arch National Park. And the arch was designed by a Finnish-American architect in 1947. The construction began in 1963. It took 2 years for it to be completed at an overall cost of $13 million, which is an equivalent to $77.5 million this day. Arches are continuing to be explored as becoming bigger, holding more weight. And the most recent example that I have here is a design from XS Foley, which is an arch that creates the longest spanning arch-based bridge in Dubai. And this was completed in 2012. An arch extended in depth to create a tunnel-like structure is called a vault. And basically, this is several arches that are lined up in a row. A barrel vault is a curving ceiling or roof structure traditionally made bricks or blocks of stone that are tightly fitted to form a unified shell. Roman builders perfected the barrel vault, developing the Groen vault, and that is simply defined as the intersection of two barrel vaults. Here we see examples of a Roman barrel vault from Arles, France, and then we also see the Palace of the Grand Master of Knights from Rhodes, Greece. A round stone arch can span longer distances and support a heavier load than a stone beam because much lower levels of stress develop. To further consider weight distribution that a barrel vault can hold, let's look at the tomb that was discovered in Luxor, Egypt. This tomb is over 60 feet deep. And you'll notice that that amount of weight of earth is just incredible. It further illustrates that early civilizations of Western Asia, as well as the Mediterranean, built arches and vaults of brick, though they used them chiefly for ground drains and tomb chambers. It was really the Romans who first used the arch extensively in above ground structures. Because they were great colonialists, they shared this architectural invention as far as they could travel by ship or by foot. And if you ever go to Eastern Europe, Western Europe, or down to Turkey and Constantinople and places to the south, you'll notice that the Romans have constructed all kinds of monuments, civilization monuments that still exist to this day. The Colosseum in Rome is one of the largest and most famous of the monuments from the Roman world. It's a structure that's still standing today. It was originally built to hold crowds of 87,000 people. If you will, take a moment to consider how many people that is. Our local Soldier Field in Chicago, which is the largest stadium in Chicago, holds only 61,500 people. Following the rounded or semicircular arch, developed the pointed Gothic arch. This was the next great structural advancement in the Western world. And although at first it may seem like a small change, its effect on the building of cathedrals was absolutely spectacular. results based on the pointed arch made it possible to build wider open spaces in cathedrals. The geometry of the pointed arch, exterior buttresses, and trusses supporting the roof allowed builders to go higher and make exterior walls with larger window areas. Pointed arches were steeper and therefore sent weight more directly downward with a substantial sideways thrust. The thrust or outward force of the arch, counterweighted by larger stone half arches were called flying buttresses. Notre Dame represents the most developed of Gothic cathedrals and the genius of its builders. In Notre Dame, architects were able to build a structural skeleton, a flying buttress, on the outside, making cathedrals higher and lighter in appearance. The function was to eliminate parts of the wall, and that elimination meant that architects could replace wall with large stained glass windows, allowing more light to enter the sanctuary. After the Gothic pointed arches invention was established, there were really no basic structural techniques that were added to Western architectural vocabulary until the 19th century. So basically, future architects designed a variety of structures that borrowed from all previous elements. Perhaps you all remember last year, on April 16th, 2019, Notre Dame, the Paris Cathedral, suffered from a devastating fire. The world lost one of the most famous World Heritage sites. And I just have to take a moment to show you the images from that fire. I was fortunate enough to have traveled there the year before. It is an incredible place. Currently, the Notre Dame is in the stages of fundraising to rebuild. Who knows how long it will take. It took over 40 years of building to even construct it so that people could go inside and worship. And then Notre Dame was in continuous stages of rebuilding upkeep. In fact, there has been speculation that the whole reason why the fire had started was that there was some building going on and that a spark might have started from lights that had been installed by that construction crew. Now, the next thing that we'll look at is the dome. And that's basically an arch that has been rotated on 180 degrees on its vertical axis. The weight of the dome will push downward and outward around all of its circumference. Therefore, the simplest support is a cylinder with walls thick enough to resist that downward and outward thrust. One of the most famous domes in the world is the Duomo in Florence, Italy, or the Cathedral of Mary Saint of the Flower. It was begun in 1296 in the Gothic style to a design of Cambro, and that was structurally completed nearly 150 years later. The dome itself was designed by Brunelleschi. The Basilica is one of Italy's largest churches, and until the development of new structural materials in the modern era, the dome was the largest of its kind in the world. It still remains to this day being the largest brick dome ever constructed. Another very famous dome is the Roman Pantheon. This dome is slightly different in that it's a cylinder that allows for a large open interior space. It has a hole in the very top of its ceiling, and that is called the oculus. The Roman Pantheon is a former Roman temple, now a Catholic church, Basilica of St. Mary and the Martyrs. It's located in Rome, Italy. Almost 2,000 years after it was built, the Pantheon's dome is still the world's largest unreinforced concrete dome. The height to the oculus and the diameter of the interior circle are the same, 142 feet. It is one of the best preserved of all the ancient Roman buildings, in large part because it has been in continuous use throughout its history and since the 7th century. So it's been very well taken care of. The other thing that's mentionable about this space is that it has amazing light. When you're viewing it inside on a sunny day, the sun will shine through it, and you can see the projection of the sun, the circular light that falls and moves along the wall, almost like a clock counting down time. The other thing is that it has incredible acoustics. Almost from standing anywhere inside that space, one could speak at a normal speaking level and be heard throughout the entire space. And this is yet another testimony to the genius of the Romans in their architecture. And then one of my personal favorite domes, and what I think is one of the most magnificent dome structures, is the Hagia Sophia, a Byzantine cathedral located in Istanbul, Turkey. Now, the Hagia Sophia has an extremely distinctive dome. It appears to float on a halo of light. Its effect is produced by rows of arched windows circling the dome base. This huge dome is supported on what appears to be a larger dome with its tops and sides removed. It has curving triangular sections called pendictives that support the overall weight of this massive dome / dome spaces. And the space when you're inside it is just enormous. It's open, it's formed by supporting walls, but they all seem to exist well above your head. To experience this place in person is worth your while. I highly recommend. By the mid-19th century, the world was being transformed by science and industry. Major changes in materials and techniques had continued at an accelerating pace and continue to do so even into the present. New inventions of the industrial age led to a revolution in architecture. First, cast iron and steel, then steel reinforced concrete. Next, electricity and the invention of the high-speed elevator gave architects a set of materials and technologies that changed the design of buildings forever. So let's start with wood in architecture. Everything that we've looked at previously as architectural innovation dealt primarily with stone. In the modern era, it became possible to build strong structures with relatively thin wooden boards. So one method of wood construction is to use a combination of post and beam with trusses. A truss is a triangular framework that is used to reinforce or support weight. Another example, log cabin timbers, the building of walls with no nails involved. Another method to build wooden strong structures in balloon framing. This is a process in which heavy timbers are replaced with studs, and those studs are held together only with nails. In the 19th century, the availability of cheap wood from the logging industry led to the balloon frame innovation in construction for houses and other small structures. Originally named balloon framing due to the preconceptions